Hey again, everyone. We are on chapter 16, and I wanted to say a couple of things. So, I probably am going to release these once a day until they're done. So, you can go ahead and watch till we get to the end of the book if you want to. If you want to wait and just watch one a week, that's fine too. It's just going to be different than if we had been in school all along. So, no matter what, if we come back in May, then hopefully I'll show the movie. I'll find some time for that. It'll just be a different experience than we've done any other year, but that's okay. So you can either watch all of this in one sitting, binge watch it, or one a day, or one a week. Anyways, fine. That's okay with me, whatever you guys decide. The other thing is, I keep forgetting to say, if you're reading along with me, don't forget, sometimes I skip a few lines. In this next chapter, I even just skip kind of a passage that just gets a little bogged down. Sometimes I switch a word or two here and there, so don't get lost if you're following with me. Just hang in there, and you'll catch right back up with me most of the time. It hasn't been a problem in the past. So anyway, when we left off, we were so excited because Aslan, yes, he was dead, but he's back. And he's got the girls with him. He has gone to the witch's house or the witch's castle and jumped over the wall, and they find themselves in that courtyard with all the statues. And so we're going to hear some words. You're going to hear, this is a great word, prodigious. Prodigious. Doesn't that sound fancy? Prodigious. And it just means big, huge, enormous. Isn't that a great word? It's prodigious. So if you want to impress somebody, instead of saying big or huge, say prodigious. And then there's concealed, and that means hidden. Okay, when you conceal something, you hide it. Interior means the inside of something. So the opposite of that is exterior, which means the outside. Interior means the inside. Ransack or ransacking is when you're searching wildly for something, not just looking for something. Ransacking is when you're pulling things out of drawers. That means you've ransacked the place looking for something. So ransacking is you're looking wildly for something. Liberated means to be set free. Din, D-I-N, that means noise. And then you're going to hear a phrase called touching his cap. They're going to say he touched his cap. So it'd be like if you're wearing a hat and you touch your hat. It's just sort of a sign of greeting or respect. Okay? Hopefully I'm going to remember to show you the picture at the end. You guys remind me, right? Okay. Get my place marker, chapter 16. What happened about the statues? What an extraordinary place, cried Lucy. All those stone animals and people, too. It's like a museum. Hush, said Susan. Aslan's doing something. And he was indeed. He had bounded up to the stone lion and breathed on him. Then, without waiting a moment, he whisked around, almost as if he had been a cat chasing its tail, and breathed also on the stone dwarf, which, as you remember, was standing a few feet from the stone lion with his back to it. Then he pounced on a tall stone dryad which stood beyond the dwarf, turned rapidly aside to deal with a stone rabbit on his right, and rushed on to two centaurs. But at that moment Lucy said, Susan, look at that stone lion. I expect you've seen someone put a lighted match to a bit of paper to a bit of paper which is propped up in a grate against an unlit fire, and for a second nothing seems to have happened. But then you notice a tiny streak of flame creeping along the edge of the paper. It was like that now. For a second after Aslan had breathed upon him, the stone lion looked just the same. Then a tiny streak of gold began to run along his white marble back. Then it spread. Then the color seemed to lick all over him as the flame licks all over the bit of paper. Then, while his hindquarters were still obviously stone, the lion shook his mane and all the heavy stone folds rippled into living hair. Then he opened a great red mouth, warm and living, and gave a prodigious yawn. And now his hind legs had come to life. He lifted one of those and scratched himself. Then, having caught sight of Aslan, he went bounding after him and frisked around him, whimpering with delight and jumping up to lick Aslan's face. Of course, the children's eyes turned to follow the lion, but the sight they saw was so wonderful that they soon forgot about him. Everywhere, statues were coming to life. The courtyard looked no longer like a museum. It looked more like a zoo. Creatures were running after Aslan and dancing around him till he was almost hidden in the crowd. Instead of all that deadly white stone, the courtyard was now a blaze of colors. And instead of the deadly silence, the whole place rang with the sound of happy roarings, brayings, yelpings, barkings, squealings, cooings, neighings, stampings, shouts, hurrahs, songs, and laughter. "Oh," said Susan in a different tone, "look, is it safe?" Lucy looked and saw that Aslan had just breathed on the feet of the stone giant. "It's all right," shouted Aslan joyously. The change was already creeping up the giant's legs, and now he was moving his feet. A moment later, he lifted his club off his shoulder, rubbed his eyes, and said, "Bless me, I must have been asleep. Now, where's that dreaded little witch that was running about on the ground? Somewhere just by my feet it was." But when everyone had shouted up to him to explain what had really happened, and when the giant had put his hand to his ear and got them all to repeat it all again so that at last he understood, then he bowed down till his head was no further off than the top of a haystack and touched his cap repeatedly to Aslan, beaming all over his honest, ugly face. "And now for the inside of the house," said Aslan. "Look alive, everyone. Upstairs and downstairs and in every chamber. Leave no corner unsearched. You never know where some prisoner may be concealed." And so into the interior they all rushed, and for several minutes all of that dark, horrible, fusty old castle echoed with the opening of windows and with everyone's voices crying out at once. But the best of all was when Lucy came rushing upstairs shouting out, "Aslan, Aslan, I think I found Mr. Tumnus. Oh, do come quick." A moment later, Lucy and the little fawn were holding each other by both hands and dancing round and round for joy. The little chap was none the worse for having been a statue and was, of course, very interested in all she had to tell him. But at last the ransacking of the witch's fortress was ended. All of the castle stood empty with every door and window open, and the light and the sweet spring air flooding into all the dark and evil places which needed them so badly. The whole crowd of liberated statues surged back into the courtyard, and it was then that someone, Tumnus I think, first said, "But how are we going to get out?" For Aslan had got in by a jump, and the gates were still locked. "That'll be all right," said Aslan, and then, rising on his hind legs, he yelled up to the giant. "You up there," he roared. "What's your name?" "Giant Rumblebuffin, if it please your honor," said the giant, once more touching his cap. "Well then, Giant Rumblebuffin," said Aslan, "just let us out of here, will you?" "Well, certainly, your honor. It'll be a pleasure," said Giant Rumblepuffin. "Stand away from the gates, all you little uns." Then he strode to the gate himself and began to bang it with his huge club. The gates creaked at the first blow, cracked at the second, and shivered at the third. Then he tackled the towers on each side of them, and after a few minutes of crashing and thudding, both the towers and a good bit of the wall on each side went thundering down in a mass of hopeless rubble. And when the dust cleared, it was odd, standing in that dry, grim, stony yard, to see through the gap, all the grass and waving trees and sparkling streams of the forest, and the blue hills beyond that, and beyond them the sky. At this point, Aslan clapped his paws together and called for silence. "Our day's work is not yet over," he said, "and if the witch is to be defeated before bedtime, we must find the battle at once." "And join in, I hope, sir," added the largest of the centaurs. "Of course," said Aslan. "And now, those who can't keep up, that is, children, dwarfs, and small animals, you must ride on the backs of those of us who can. That is, lions, centaurs, unicorns, horses, giants, and eagles. Those who are good with their noses must come in the front with us lions, to smell out where the battle is. Look lively and sort yourselves." And with a great deal of bustle and cheering they did. The most pleased of all of them was the other lion, who kept running around everywhere pretending to be very busy, but really just to be able to say to everyone he met, "Did you hear what he said? Us lions. That means him and me, us lions." That's what I like about Aslan. No side, no standoffishness. Us lions. He meant him and me. At least he went on saying this till Aslan had him loaded up with 3 dwarves, 1 dryad, 2 rabbits, and a hedgehog. That steadied him a bit. When all were ready, it was a big sheepdog who actually helped Aslan most in getting them sorted into their proper order. They set out through the gap in the castle wall. At first, the lions and dogs went nosing about in all directions. But then suddenly one great hound picked up the scent and gave a bay. There was no time lost after that. Soon all the dogs and lions and wolves and other hunting animals were going at full speed with their noses to the ground, and all the others, streaked out for about a half a mile behind them, were following as fast as they could. Faster and faster they went as the scent became easier and easier to follow. And then, just as they came to the last curve in a narrow, winding valley, Lucy heard above all these noises another noise, a different one, which gave her a funny feeling inside. It was the noise of shouts and screams and the clashing of metal against metal. Then they came out of the narrow valley, and at once she saw the reason. There stood Peter and Edmund on all the rest of Aslan's army, fighting desperately against the crowd of horrible creatures whom she had just seen last night. Only now in the daylight they looked even stranger and more evil. There also seemed to be far more of them. Peter's army, which had their backs to her, looked terribly few, and there were statues all over the battlefield, so apparently the witch had been using her wand. But she didn't seem to be using it now. She was fighting with her stone knife. It was Peter she was fighting, both of them going at it so hard that Lucy could hardly make out what was happening. She only saw the stone knife and Peter's sword flashing so quickly that they looked like 3 knives and 3 swords. That pair were in the center. On each side, the line stretched out, and horrible things were happening wherever she looked. "Off my back, children!" shouted Aslan, and they both tumbled off. Then, with a roar that shook all of Narnia from the western lamppost to the shores of the eastern sea, the great lion flung himself upon the White Witch. Lucy saw her face lifted toward him for 1 second with an expression of terror and amazement. Then the lion and witch had rolled over together, but with the witch underneath, And at the same moment, all the warlike creatures whom Aslan had led from the witch's house rushed madly on the enemy lines. Dwarfs with their battle axes, dogs with their teeth, the giant with his club and his feet, unicorns with their horns, centaurs with swords and hooves. And Peter's tired army cheered, and the newcomers roared, and the enemies squealed and gibbered till the wood echoed with the din of that battle. Chapter 17, The Hunting of the White Stag. All right, and that's where we'll pick up the next time. Let me show you a picture. So this is the battle. You can see it pretty good. All right, so chapter 17 is going to be our last one. Think about that. What could happen in the last chapter of this book? Think about how things ended in the first book. As you make your predictions for how is this all going to get wrapped up and end in this second book. A question I usually have is every year during this point is, does that mean when Aslan flung himself on the witch, is she dead? And I'll go ahead and give a spoiler and say, yes, she is. And remember, her power, she's a powerful person, but she's never been as powerful as Aslan. Is she going to be able to come back to life? No, there's no deeper magic for her. All right, I will see you next time. Love you guys. Bye.